in the heart of Central Africa, where the Congo River winds through dense forests and sprawling savannas, there once stood one of the most powerful kingdoms the continent had ever known. The Kingdom of Kongo, which rose to prominence in the 14th century, controlled vast territories that today span parts of Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Republic of Congo, and Gabon. At its height, this kingdom commanded the respect of neighboring states and eventually caught the attention of European powers who arrived on African shores seeking trade and opportunity. The Congo was a sophisticated state with a complex administrative system, a capital city called Mbanza, Congo, that housed tens of thousands of people, and a ruling class that understood the intricacies of diplomacy, warfare, and commerce. The kingdom's wealth initially derived from a diverse economic base that included agriculture, mining of copper and iron, the production of raffia cloth that served as both clothing and currency, and control over important trade routes that connected the interior to the coast. When Portuguese explorers first made contact with the Kingdom of Kongo in 1483, they encountered a realm that was already well established and prosperous. The Portuguese were impressed by the organization they found, and the Congo's ruler, the Mane Kongo, saw potential benefits in establishing relations with these newcomers who possessed interesting technologies and trade goods. What followed was a period of relatively cooperative engagement, with the Congo adopting Christianity, sending emissaries to Europe, and engaging in trade that seemed mutually beneficial. Among the many goods that flowed through this early trade relationship, ivory quickly emerged as one of the most desired commodities. African elephants, which roamed the forests and grasslands in enormous numbers, provided tusks that were larger and of higher quality than their Asian counterparts. European markets craved ivory for creating religious artifacts, decorative items, piano keys, billiard balls, and countless other luxury goods that signaled wealth and status in Renaissance and early modern Europe. The ivory trade initially appeared to be a blessing for the Kingdom of Kongo. The kingdom controlled territories rich in elephant populations, and the extraction of ivory required relatively less infrastructure than mining operations. Hunters, many of whom possessed skills passed down through generations, could venture into the forests and return with valuable tusks that commanded high prices from European traders. The Mane Kongo and regional nobles who controlled hunting territories collected taxes and tributes from this trade, adding to the royal treasury. Ivory became a key export alongside enslaved people, copper, and textiles, and for a time it seemed that the kingdom had found another source of wealth to fuel its power and prestige. The Portuguese established trading posts along the coast and increasingly in the interior, creating networks that funneled African goods toward European markets while bringing firearms, cloth, alcohol, and other manufactured goods into the kingdom. However, the intensive hunting of elephants that the ivory trade demanded began to have profound and irreversible consequences. Elephants, despite their size and numbers, reproduce slowly, with females typically giving birth to a single calf after a gestation period of nearly 2 years, and calves remaining dependent on their mothers for several years. As the European demand for ivory grew insatiable, driven by expanding markets and new applications for the material, hunting pressure increased dramatically. Regions that once teemed with elephants began to see their populations decline. Hunters had to venture farther from established settlements, penetrating deeper into forests and competing with neighboring groups for access to remaining elephant populations. This expansion of hunting territories led to conflicts with other peoples and kingdoms, destabilizing regional relationships that had previously been managed through diplomacy and tribute systems. The economic structure of the Kingdom of Kongo began to shift in ways that ultimately weakened rather than strengthened it, as ivory and the slave trade became increasingly central to the kingdom's economy. Traditional economic activities received less attention and investment. The production of raffia cloth, which had been both an art form and a crucial element of local commerce, declined in importance as imported European textiles became more available. Agricultural production, which sustained the population and had been carefully managed through complex systems of land tenure and labor organization, suffered as more people became involved in hunting, trading, and the violence associated with capturing enslaved people to sell to European traders. The kingdom found itself in a peculiar economic trap where its wealth became increasingly dependent on extractive activities that provided short-term gains but undermined long-term stability and prosperity. The depletion of elephant populations had cascading environmental and economic effects that few at the time could have anticipated. Elephants play a crucial role in African ecosystems as what ecologists call a keystone species. Their feeding habits create clearings in forests, their movements establish paths that other animals use, and their dung disperses seeds across vast distances, maintaining the diversity and health of plant communities. As elephant numbers declined in territories controlled by or adjacent to the Kingdom of Kongo, these ecological functions diminished. Forests became denser and less navigable, affecting both human settlement patterns and the populations of other animals that depended on the habitat modifications elephants provided. For communities that had relied on hunting various game animals, not just elephants, these changes meant diminishing returns from traditional hunting grounds. Economically, the diminishing elephant populations meant that the Kingdom of Kongo faced a cruel dilemma. European traders still demanded ivory, but it became progressively harder and more expensive to obtain. Hunters had to travel farther, stay away from their communities longer, and take greater risks to find elephants with substantial tusks. The costs of the ivory trade increased, while the benefits decreased, yet the kingdom had become dependent on this trade for the firearms, luxury goods, and other items that had become integrated into its political and social systems. The ruling class needed these trade goods to maintain their status and power, to reward loyal followers, and to conduct diplomacy with both European powers and neighboring African states. This dependency gave European traders increasing leverage in their dealings with the kingdom, allowing them to dictate terms that were progressively less favorable to Congo interests. The transformation brought about by the ivory trade paralleled and intersected with the even more devastating impact of the Atlantic slave trade. As elephant populations declined and ivory became scarcer, the slave trade grew in relative importance as a source of export revenue. The two trades were often interconnected, with the same networks, traders, and political arrangements facilitating both. The violence and social disruption caused by slave raiding and warfare aimed at capturing people to sell into slavery compounded the problems caused by ivory hunting. Communities were destroyed, populations displaced, and traditional authorities undermined. The Kingdom of Kongo, which had once been a centralized and powerful state, began to fragment as regional leaders pursued their own interests in the trade, sometimes in defiance of the Mani-Kongo's authority. By the 17th century, the kingdom had entered a period of civil wars and succession disputes that European traders exploited, playing different factions against each other to maintain favorable trading conditions. The story of how ivory affected the Kingdom of Kongo is ultimately a tragedy, of how external demand for natural resources can fundamentally transform and destabilize even powerful and sophisticated societies. The kingdom's rulers were not naive or unsophisticated in their engagement with European traders. They understood commerce, negotiation, and the projection of power. However, they could not fully anticipate how the scale of European demand, driven by markets thousands of miles away, would create pressures that their traditional political and economic systems could not manage. The depletion of elephants was not just an environmental problem, but a symptom of a broader transformation in which the kingdom's economy became reoriented towards serving external markets rather than meeting internal needs. The wealth that flowed from ivory and slave trading enriched some individuals and families, but it did not build the kinds of lasting institutions, infrastructure, or economic diversity that might have allowed the kingdom to adapt and thrive. Instead, it created dependencies, fueled conflicts, and ultimately contributed to the kingdom's decline as a major power in Central Africa, leaving it vulnerable to further European encroachment in subsequent centuries.